that's when everything started to click for me a little bit more. And I feel like the first time she was diagnosed, I was really hopeful. And then that second time was really when everything started to click.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of The Day After. On today's episode, we have Steven, the brother of a previous guest, and he opens up his side of losing his mom while he was in college. Steven shared how he struggled to process his grief and opened up his journey to us. Also, we have exciting news. We have launched The Day After Plus. This is a way to help financially support the show and the work Ashley and I do and support our guests. If it's in your heart to help, go to thedayafter.com/plus, that's PLUS, and become an official supporter of the show. Thank you so much. Now grab your favorite blanket, curl up on the couch, and enjoy the show.
As you had Mary Grace on, you spoke with my sister just about, I lost my mother at the age of 19 to a glioblastoma or brain cancer. You know, she was sick for, about 2 years. A little over 2 years, so about 2.5 years. And, it was weird. I think as time goes on and as you go through this grief battle, I guess you would call it, not even a battle, but you meet people from all different walks of life. And it was really hard for me to find a way to connect with people who, whether that be, they lost like their great grandparent, they'd be like, I'm so sorry for your loss, or, I know what it's like, or I'm sorry about this. And it was so hard for me. And, when I found your podcast and Ashley kind of introduced me to it and, let me know through LinkedIn, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I started listening to some episodes, and it really helped me in terms of like being able to connect with somebody who had gone through it and had gone through a similar circumstance. And I think that was what I was missing for so long, where I felt so alone in my journey of mourning my mom, and I didn't really know how to talk about it. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know, where to even start, because there was so much. I felt like, and you kind of touched on that in the last episode. I've heard in previous episodes as well, CJ. It's like when you're in that moment, it's just, you're kind of just like, you're going through it. You're just going through the motions, and you're just trying to get through the next day. You're not really thinking about like what's going on right then and there. And that's when it's all over, that's when you kind of start thinking about it.
Yeah. I'm getting choked up. That's awesome that it's been a resource for you. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. You were early in high school, right? Or did she first get diagnosed when you were 19?
So she passed when I was 19, and she got diagnosed when I was either 16 or I was 17. I had just turned 17. And it was a really tough time. And because, I had just lost my grandfather, my papa, to cancer as well. And, he was 84 and he lived a really good life. And I was super, super close with him. So I took that one really hard, and I took his loss really hard. And then, all that was going on. And I remember, my pop was in the hospital, RGH, and I got home from school one day, and my mom was a nurse, and my dad is in the medical field as well as a primary care physician. And I remember getting home one day, nobody was home. And that was weird, because usually my mom worked till around 3:30. And, I get a call from my dad saying, hey, this is in April, we're at RGH. And I'm like, oh my God, did Papa die? And he's just like, no, it's your mom. And I was just like, it's Mom. And I'm just like, what? And he's just like, yeah, Mom, what happened was she was at work, and unfortunately, she lost her speech, and they thought she was having a stroke. And I was just like in shock, because I was expecting it to be my Papa.
Right.
So then, fast forward, and we find out she has, brain cancer going into the summer of my senior year, right around June time, we find out. And I think for me, just at that age, it was really difficult for me to grasp. I think I'd never really let that sink in personally at times.
Right.
Looking back in those moments, I kind of never really, I think maybe, I don't know if I was in denial or if I was just trying to get through, but I'll never forget the day of her first brain surgery. It was about a 5-hour surgery, and my buddies all picked me up, and we all went to meals like halfway through the surgery. And, just to kind of get me out. And my friends, they were just great. And just kind of coming back, I think I was a little naive and just young to not, I thought that maybe that this might not be as bad as the doctors think, it might not be bad. And I think my sisters and my dad both knew, like, something was really wrong, but I guess I just didn't think about it at first, too hard.
Yeah. When that happened, you're home, you get the call, and you're going into your senior year, the summer of your senior year. Like you said, you didn't really let that sink in. Do you remember ever having conversations with your friends when it first started happening, or like who did you reach out to maybe consciously or unconsciously reach out for support?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I have a really good friend. His name's Tanner, and I just remember when my mom, when they found out it was cancerous, because at first, they thought, maybe this isn't cancerous, maybe it's benign, and we can get this out, and she'll be fine. And then I think like a few days later, I'll never forget my dad coming out, and we're all sitting outside, and my dad just, starts having a really hard time with everything and tells us, it's cancerous. And I just remember just feeling like this sinking feeling and, in my body. And I called my buddy Tanner, and I was like, hey, can I come over? Can I just come over and play ping pong? That's what we love to do, is just play ping pong. And we hung out, we played ping pong in the basement, and, I didn't really talk about it. I just was like, this really stinks. I didn't really think about the 10 steps ahead. And so I guess, like, for me, and to answer that question, is I really did rely on my friends, and my friends were amazing during those really difficult times in my life. And they were always really there to help me, and also just be there to talk if I wanted to. They never forced it on me. And then I also feel like I really went to, some of my aunts, my dad's sisters. They were phenomenal during the whole entire process. And I would go over there and talk with them, and they were really helpful.
Yeah, I remember Mary mentioning your aunts, I think, at one point. That's pretty incredible that you were able to find people to talk to. Or I think it's incredible that you were able to recognize the need to talk. So that last year of high school, then the senior year, which is supposed to be this amazing, like, pivotal moment in every, adolescent's life as you're moving towards adulthood and figuring out your life. Do you feel like it changed your course in life, or how did it change that course?
That's a really good question. I think the way I always say this is, like, I feel like I had to grow up quick. I feel like I had to figure things out. All my friends were, going to college tours and doing all of that. And I maybe went on one college tour with my mom and my dad. And it was actually the college that I ended up going to. But, all my friends were trying to figure out their college. They were going away. They were going on vacation. And I was just kind of at home, helping with my dad or doing what I could, to help out. And also trying to live my life too at the same time, which is hard to find that balance. But I really felt like that first week of senior year was really when I realized, okay, it's time to kind of grow up a little bit and, like, own up. Because, at that time, my mom was in Pittsburgh at the hospital. She had a series of grand mal seizures. And, I went down there for about a week, and I stayed in a hotel room with my dad. And then my dad was like, you got to get back for the first day of school. And I was like, Dad, I don't want to go back. Like, I want to be here in Pittsburgh with you. And he's like, well, this is what Mom would want. And, at the time, my mom was non-communicative, and, she couldn't communicate well with us. And, but I know that she wouldn't want me there. My mom was tough. And the one thing she really cared about was, my education, and also just making sure I was going to school and being with my friends. And that's really what she cared about. Yeah. So I remember my aunts drove me back, and this is really when, like, to answer your question, this is really when things kind of got heavy for me, I think, is driving back, and I had the flu. I must have caught it at the hospital or something. And I just remember laying in the backseat of my aunt's car and just, like, so sick, like 103-degree fever, just terrible. And all I wanted was, being like a mama's boy, all I wanted was, like, my mom just to, like, take care of me,
Right.
And I'm the worst person to be sick around. Like, oh my God, I'm terrible. Like, all I do is complain.
At least you're aware. At least you're aware.
Like, I've got a bad man cold. But I just remember coming home, and, like, my aunt, she dropped me off, and she stayed with me for a night. And then, school was the next day. And I ended up missing the first day of school, my senior day. And because I was sick with the flu, and I was home all alone. No, my aunts were stopping by here and there to check in on me, but they had to work too. And my sisters were in Pittsburgh. Mary Grace was at Duquesne and finishing up her, year of nursing school. And Catherine was at Pitt, I think going into her sophomore year. And I was just kind of, my dad was taking care of my mom and had to be by her side. And I just remember just sitting there just being like, oh my God, like I gotta figure this out. Like I can't rely on mom to take care of me right now. And I can't rely on that in this moment. And, the next week or so, I kind of was on my own. I was going to school and I was coming home by myself to an empty house. And it was just really weird and really like lonely at the time. I had friends stopping over pretty often, which was nice. And, it was like one of those moments where I look back, you don't think about it in that moment, but you look back and you're like, whoa, I started my senior year off that way.
Right. How long were you alone?
Just about a week. I mean, not even, maybe like 3 or 5 days. I remember I got home and then my mom came back maybe two weeks later. It was such a blur. But at the time before then, when I was, when my mom had the seizures and I came up, I was staying at my aunt's house for a while, my Aunt Bean. And I was staying there, and then I wanted to stay at home just because I was closer to school. I was only about a 5-minute walk from school, so it just made sense. But then things really started kind of heating up in terms of like realizing I had to, I had to kind of step up and grow up because my sisters were finishing up school and they had to do what they had to do in Pittsburgh, and my mom wanted them there, and I definitely wanted them there, no question in my mind. And my mom was doing her rehab at Strong. She was able to get back and do her rehab at Strong. And every single day I would, at the time I was playing basketball at Mendon, but we were in the fall league. And every single day I'd go to school and go see my mom at the hospital right after school. And then I'd bring my homework with me. I'd sit with her for about 2 hours. And then my dad would come at 5:30, and then I'd leave and I'd either go to like the night ball or practice or whatever it might be. And I did that every single day for like 2 weeks, maybe longer, because I think she was at Strong for about a month in the rehab. And each day was actually kind of a beautiful thing because I got to see my mom get better each day. I mean, some days were really hard, and those first couple of weeks she wasn't able to talk to me, or she would try to talk to me, and all the seizures she had, it was too difficult for her to. And I did that every single day. And it was weird because I wasn't living that, senior lifestyle. My friends were going out. They were, doing their, whatever that we did senior year, having fun, going out, drinking, partying. Yeah. And I was, and I did plenty of that too. But I was every day after school, I was going to see my mom, and I wouldn't take it back for the world. But it was just one of those things where you look back and, it's not a very normal thing for a 17-year-old kid to be going through that every single day.
No. I think about like you going back to being home alone for those few days or that week. And I know like for me, it wasn't even an empty house. I still had my kids, but like just coming to a house that wasn't the same, not having my wife here, and how like empty and difficult that felt. I mean, there's even those moments now, 2.5 years later, where I still feel that emptiness and like trying to go to bed and like things like I just can't get comfortable. And I imagine like a 17-year-old, young man trying to be like, okay, I'm home alone. I'm taking care of shit myself. And my mom's fighting for her life. My sisters are there. Like, what did you do for some coping mechanisms? Especially as you now, like you said, you're at the hospital, you're going to basketball, like there's so much riding on all these different things and still trying to be a kid and living out your last senior year. Did you know, like maybe reflecting back, what some of those coping mechanisms were besides like the talking with some of your friends and stuff?
I think like for me, like, basketball was big, not even just like competitively, but going to the Y and playing with my friends, that was big. I mean, growing up, there was the old Pittsford Y. I mean, that was like where everyone played pickup basketball. And for me, like that was kind of like my therapy, was going to play basketball with my friends. Yeah. It kind of got everything off my mind. and took away some of those bad moments throughout the day. And, my teachers my senior year were super great too, and super helpful and always there to talk. I guess like another, coping mechanism that maybe I didn't adopt then, but I've adopted more so now is just running. I like to run. I feel like when I'm running, I can kind of get things off my mind. But back then as a 17-year-old kid, nobody really talks to you about coping mechanisms. You just kind of figure it out as you go.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm sure my sisters felt the same way. I mean, Mary Grace was probably, and Catherine were probably saying, what do I do? I'm in college. Catherine and being in college, Mary Grace both being in college, both very formative years of your life. And all your friends are probably going out drinking, but Catherine and Mary Grace are at the hospital with my mom. And there was also that part of me that really, when she was in Pittsburgh and I was back here, I really wanted to be there. But I guess for coping, basketball was really my therapy at that moment. Just, whether I'd just be playing with my friends or playing with my teammates, that was it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's definitely been, mine became like photography and like just these different ways to get my thoughts to just go away for a little bit. So that way I'm like out of my head and into something else, or cooking or tennis or anything like that. So I can definitely relate with that.
I think I played a lot of basketball.
You did?
Yeah.
Wait, you played basketball?
Yeah. My dad was like my coach for like CYO, and
because
I was like only 9. So I forget. I can't remember what sports I was like still into. I feel like I played soccer, and we had a very active neighborhood. We all played kickball like every day after school together. And I like literally like the day my mom died, I went to like my neighbor's house after. I was like, oh, she's dead. See you later. going to hang out with my friends. But we would all hang out in our neighborhood a lot. So I was always playing with the neighborhood kids, and we like to trade Pokemon cards back then. That was like the big thing.
That's huge now. Yeah.
Actually, I remember working at your camp that you guys used to run with Olivia, with Olivia at the time. And your dad cooked it for everybody and all that. I remember that. Yeah. Back in, I think, high school, I did that.
Yeah. Yeah. Nicholas ran that sports camp.
Yeah. Nick. Yeah.
But yeah, we would like, I think we just resorted to our friends as well. Like I'm trying to think about Nick and Olivia, but even them, they played in the neighborhood with us and the neighborhood kids. And like, they were always there, when she was having a bad, a bad day, or even like I said, on that last day, my good friends, Quinn and Mark, lived in the neighborhood, like right behind us. Cause we lived, in that private drive. And so I was there all the time. And yeah, especially after she passed.
That's all. And you were in that house for a couple of years, right? And then you guys moved to Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't move until after Dad and Delana got married, but we were there. So like we're still friends with like all the neighbors from that. We still keep in touch with them, and because they're like the people in our lives, in my life at least, that like knew my mom.
Right.
A lot of my friends, most of my friends, it's only my friend Quinn and Julia. I think there might be a few more that like remember my mom, but other than that, my closest friends don't.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I found that sometimes I'm more drawn to people who don't know my previous life than those who do, for some reason. I haven't quite figured out why, but that tends to be how it is for me for the most part. But, okay. So getting back to your story, you talked a lot about like going through high school, your mom comes out of the hospital. Presumably, if I'm remembering the timelines somewhat correctly, I'm assuming she was okay for graduation. Was she at your graduation for high school?
Yeah. So, that was super, super special for me because, after she got out of the hospital and out of rehab, she had probably like, 9 really good months where I felt like, my mom wasn't, totally back to who my mom was before she was sick, but she was able to talk. She was able to text me. We were able to, hang out, go on walks together. And, with her type of cancer, unfortunately, she wasn't able to drive, and she wasn't able to kind of do a lot of things that anybody would want to do. She got a lot of her freedoms taken away, unfortunately. with her specific type of cancer of the brain because of the seizures that she would have. But for graduation, she was there, and there's this picture of my aunt took actually, and it's of me and I always kind of come back to it when I'm missing her, and it's of me and my mom, and it's just you can't see my face, but you can see my mom's face, and we're hugging each other, and she got the biggest smile on her face, and for me that I always come back to that picture when I miss her because, growing up I was not the easiest kid to deal with. To say the least.
There it is.
Yeah. I put my parents through it. God bless my dad and my mom because they were so supportive of me throughout, all those years in school where, I really didn't want to go to college. I really, didn't love school. I didn't love sitting in a classroom. It just wasn't for me. And I drove my mom through a wall doing that, but she always wanted me to. She always believed in me, and my mom always believed in me, and that was and my dad too. But my mom really always believed in me, and she always kind of I felt like got me. She understood I was such a troublemaker, but she never could be mad at me for whatever reason.
You're the youngest.
Yep, I'm the youngest.
And the only boy.
Yep.
As we call Nicholas in my family, the rose amongst the thorns, which I always remind my parents that I think it's the opposite, but
Yeah. So she was there and then you graduated. Now you said you didn't want to go to college, which I resonate with. I am not someone who wants to sit down in a classroom. I love education, but I love it on my own terms. Did having that experience your senior year affect your decision on what you want to do in the future even more?
Yeah, I think, and it's funny you asked that to me because I was actually talking to one of my coworkers about it today. And he actually lost his father when he was 13 to cancer as well. And we were just kind of talking. I was talking to him about the podcast, and I actually showed him your information, everything like that. And he's like, really? I got to give this a listen. So he loved what you guys are doing. But kind of going back to what you said, I think it was hard for me to make that decision, when I was going to college, because part of me really wanted to stay back and go to MCC or go to St. John Fisher or go to FLCC or whatever it might be, or maybe even take a couple of years off. My mom was just so adamant on going to college and getting a good education and not staying back. Like I would always say, I can go to MCC for a couple of years and stay back. And, looking back, sometimes I wish I had done that, and at the same time, selfishly, sometimes I wish I didn't, which I can get into, later as time went on and she got sicker. But I think Canisius was like a perfect halfway point for me in those two decisions where Canisius being in Buffalo, it's only an hour away. I was still able to get home. I didn't have a car, but luckily at the time, my roommate was from Rochester. So he was able to help me out, get home. And my mom had a lot of friends, and our family, of course, would pick me up if I needed to get home. Or I would take the train home. I took that home a couple of times, and it was really easy to get home. So I felt like knowing what my mom, who she was, that I knew I had to go to college. I knew I had to give it a try.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't, I think she would have been upset. And I know that she vocalized that a few times with me. So, I didn't want to take my SATs. I didn't want to do any of that. And my aunt Bean, who was like yelling at me every day. You take your SAT yet? No, Aunt Bean, I didn't take my SAT yet,
I never took mine. And that's why I went to MCC. Because they did the college fair, and I asked them, I'm like, do you need SATs? They're like, no. And I was like, fantastic. I know where I'm going for college.
She's like, I'll go here. Oh my God.
They're like, you just need a pulse and money. And I was like, I have both. So let's go.
That's great.
Yeah.
Not so sure on the pulse sometimes, but it's fine.
Yeah. Dead inside.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So you're at, go ahead, Ashley.
No, I was just going to ask about like the start of college and kind of what you were feeling in those moments. Like as it kind of, you didn't really want to go. And as it came up, and then you had your first few weeks, what were you feeling?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I always will remember is, my mom and dad moved me in for freshman year, which was really cool. Looking back if you had asked me a year ago when I was in that situation with my mom in Pittsburgh and strong, if she would have been able to drop me off at college, see me graduate, hold a graduation party for me, cook my sauce, everything that I loved that she did before I left, I would have said no way, but she did all that. And I'll never forget like her dropping me off, and my dad and her stayed a couple days in Buffalo just to kind of like, hang out and make sure I was settled in, being the caring parents they were. And, I just remember forget like leaving and bringing them to the car and them leaving and just being very like sad. I think anybody's sad when like their parents leave for college, but I just remember I didn't cry. I usually don't cry, but I just remember just feeling like, oh, like, okay, see ya. And I'll never forget that image of like them going to their car and me kind of standing there and then being like, okay, now I got to figure this stuff out and do this, on my own and not worry about what's going on back home. And I guess the great part about that was, and I'm thankful for it, was my mom was doing really well. She was actually in remission at that time. So
Oh, yeah.
I felt like I was in the best place possible to be going to college, in terms of mentally. And then as time went on throughout the year, that's when things kind of got worse. And I think it was December. It was November, Thanksgiving came around. My mom's speech started getting a little weird, and we were all kind of like, what's going on here? And I think more so my dad and my sisters knew more than I did. And then December kind of came along and she had some more seizures. And that's obviously a telltale sign that the cancer probably had come back and the tumors had probably come back. And I remember like going back to college for second semester that first week, and I'm saying that they did a scan and that, that they need to operate again. And I think either Catherine picked me up or Mary Grace picked me up or someone picked me up, and we ended up going back to Strong in that same waiting room. And that's when everything started to click for me a little bit more. And I feel like the first time she was diagnosed, I was really hopeful. And then that second time was really when everything started to click. And I just remember it was a really, really cold January day, like classic Rochester winter, very cold, and being in a sweatshirt, and the surgery was about 6 hours long, just waiting in that waiting room. And, the doctor coming out and talking to my dad and just kind of seeing my dad and his reaction and, just knowing that, okay, this isn't good. And at that moment, my second semester had just started. I didn't have a good first semester freshman year in terms of grades.
You don't say. As my uncle likes to say, C's get degrees.
That's right. It all looks the same on the diploma, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't have a good semester at all. I was like, I think like 0.2 away from academic probation. My parents never found out, but thank God. But I just remember going back and thinking to myself, how am I going to go back? How am I going to go back to school right now? And I'm sure my sister Catherine was feeling the same way. And I'm sure, I think Mary Grace was graduating at this point. So Catherine was a junior at this point. So I'm sure I know she was feeling the same way as me. Like, how do you go back to school?
Yeah. And you had the like benefit, I suppose, of being slightly closer, right? Because she was still in Pittsburgh.
Exactly. And I had that, I had the benefit of being about an hour away, where Catherine was, 4. And I know that was really hard on her. And, but she always came home like a lot. So I give Catherine a lot of credit for that, because she came home a lot for my mom. And so did Mary Grace, obviously. After graduating from nursing school, she could have stayed in Pittsburgh, but she came back to Rochester. And I know that was to be with my mom and to be with our family. But I think like, I'll never forget like going back to school and just being like, what the heck am I going to do? Like, I was so lost. And I had a really great roommate freshman year. And he's still one of my friends to this day. I was just with him this weekend, and we would kind of talk like every night, before bed. That was like our thing. We were really, really close, and he was really there for me during that time. And I had a really, really good friend named Blake, who I'm really still good friends with as well. And, he was always there, always a guy if I had to have a good cry, he'd be there. Just if I needed to talk. And I still think at that point, I still was really hopeful because I knew that they were going to get a second opinion. And for whatever reason, I felt that, getting a second opinion meant maybe there's a shot,
Yeah.
And I think there was that denial as part of it. And then, you get through the year, and I think my mom and dad both decided, and my mom decided that we're going to try this treatment here in Strong and see what happens. And as time went on, she wasn't really responding to the treatments. Unfortunately, like the radiation, the chemo, just was really beating her up, especially the steroids. And she was just so unhappy. And actually, I won't say that, because she was the happiest woman I ever met in terms of grace and how she handled the situation. I mean, everybody who knew my mom, she always knew she had a smile, but she was just really suffering. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I think she was hanging on for us for a lot of that. And, I guess for me, the one memory that really sticks out is, I was working a landscaping job at the time. And at that moment, I was, sitting in a truck, and my mom had her second MRI, and she didn't go well. And I figured, okay, well, I remember texting my dad saying, "Hey Dad, what's going on with Mom?" He's like, "Okay, we'll talk about it when we get home." I'm like, "Okay, well, what is going on with Mom?" And my dad, not really, I think he had a really hard time being able to just tell it over text. So I was like, okay, I've got to get back. I've got to get back home. So, I was working this job, and I told my boss at the time, I was like, "Hey, I got to go. Like, something's up." And I got home, and I remember my mom just kind of like sitting there, and she was crying, and my aunts were there, and I was just like, "Oh my God." And I just remember just like dropping, like like those movies you see where people like just drop to the ground and sob. I just remember like, I could not, I was inconsolable. I just dropped to the ground and sobbed like a baby for like an hour and a half. And that's really when it hit me, and when I knew what was going to happen.
How long, how long was this before she did end up passing?
This was in June, so about 4 or 5 months. Yeah. And that's when she said, she wanted to stop treatment, or there was no other options, I think the doctor said. And, we were all there, and I think it was just so hard for me. And I just remember going and sitting in the shower and crying for like an hour and a half straight, where your eyes just hurt, and
Yep.
that's one memory that really sticks out. And I think it's funny about those certain memories you wish you could remember, but for whatever reason, I don't know if I think you've touched on this before as well, is just you remember the really hard times. And sometimes it's really hard to remember the good times too.
Yeah.
Those negative ones, they stick with us more than anything, I just remember, especially early on, but occasionally still just being so haunted by watching and remembering hospice and watching her take her last breath. And it's like all those memories are the memories of the things that I did that I'm like, why the fuck did I do that? I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I could have done better. And I think the thing that I've had to learn is like, how do I just surrender to that's what happened, and to give myself grace, and forgiveness.
Like, you were doing what you could in that moment.
Right.
I don't actually really remember my mom being sick. I remember like her back hurting and it being like, Mom is sick, which I think I've said before. Like, I don't really even, actually, I think I was talking to my family about this, but I was like, I don't really remember my dad being like, Mom has cancer, but I don't remember him like not telling me that, you know what I mean? Like, I knew my mom was sick. I knew that was a thing. She was going to the doctors. We had like an amazing nanny at the time, like literally up until just after she passed. I mean, she like put her life on hold for us. And then I like kind of remember her like getting like, losing her hair. Like, I think I look back and I'm like, hey, that was like point B. And then it was like, there's the special bed in her bedroom. And like, even as I think I wrote a poem. I like won a poetry contest when I was like at the library or something. And I wrote about like her special bed. Like, so there's like 3 or 4 phases that I remember over the course of, I don't even know how many years it was, like 4 years probably. And other than that, I don't really remember her like sick, but I knew she was because like the babysitter took care of us during the day, even though she'd be home, but she wasn't well. Sometimes she was at chemo, obviously, you know, I know that now. And my grandparents would come and like take care of us at night. You know, like my dad was working and he was obviously there too, but like my grandparents were always there too. And a lot of family members, like my dad talked about. So I like don't really have the memories of, which is, I mean, I feel like I should be thankful for this. Although in a way I'm kind of like, I wish I was like just a few years older so that I could like remember, you know, what happened and like be there in a way. But I'm sure that I was, you know, there for her in a way that was helpful at the time for her.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's interesting, like just like no memory of it. And I don't know if, I don't think my siblings really have much memory of it, but I won't speak for them. And so those were like, you know, the 4 or 5 stages that I kind of remember of my mom being sick. But I can absolutely remember, you know, like the day that she passed and like just those uncontrollable sobs of like my dad and then me.
Yeah, and I think I didn't add this in before I started, but you guys, both of you, you know, your stories, and I know they're both very difficult, CJ, you know, and I want to say I'm sorry for the loss of your wife, and you know, Ashley, for your mother, but you know, I think what you guys are both doing here is something really special, and I think that it's going to help a lot of people, like a lot of people. It's already helped me immensely, in my own, and it's, you know, and I think one thing you guys talked about was like time does not heal grief. You know what I mean? Like it's always going to hurt. It's just you learn to deal with it in a healthy way, and I think finding people to talk to about it is the best way to do it for people who are grieving. So I just want to add that in there before we kind of continue. Just I really appreciate what you guys are doing. So I mean that.
Thank
you so much.
I feel like that's a really good segue into what I was going to talk about or wanted to like talk to you a little bit about. And I think, you know, we talked about before you came on as well, but so we know that, you know, it was like 4 or 5 months and Mary told us about how, you guys ended up, taking her to hospice and your mom passed a few hours later. You know, what has life been like for you since that day, since she passed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's been so, it's gone by so quick, and also sometimes.
How many years has it been?
It's been 5, a little over 5 years now. Yeah. And some days it feels like it just happened yesterday, and then other days it feels like it was years and years ago. I go back and forth between that feeling.
Well, you've done a lot since then. You know, you graduated college, got a job, and you're still in the Buffalo area, right?
Correct. Yep, still in the Buffalo area, working in a marketing and advertising role, and worked another job before that, at Paychex actually, where I know your dad works, Ashley.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think for me it was, I'll never forget, like, you know, my mom passes away and then the funeral happens and then I go back to school 5 days after the funeral.
And this is still your freshman year?
Sophomore year.
Oh, sophomore year. Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, if I can backtrack a little bit, I'll never forget, like, before that, you know, it was like October 12th and my mom died on the 16th, and my dad's cousin, Mary Jo, texted me and says, you know, hey, we're on our way to pick you up. And I was actually living with their son at the time. So my second cousin, Nicholas, and he was my roommate. So it was really nice to have him around. And they texted me and said, we're on our way to pick you up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know why it didn't hit me. Like, I don't know. I just saw my mom like a week before, and I thought, I knew she was declining, but she just declined really, really quick. And I think, you know, thankfully, you know, my sisters and my dad and my aunts, they kept some of that from me, which I'm not upset about, because I think, you know, I think they did that to protect me a little bit. And I just remember coming home, and I guess the best thing I could say, and where I'll segue after this to what life was like after, but I got to say goodbye to my mom, and that's something that I don't think many people get an opportunity. And I was able to kind of tell her everything I wanted to tell her when I got back, and she couldn't talk, but she was crying and I was crying, and I was able to tell her everything I wanted to tell her about what I'm going to do as I get older. And, you know, I'm always going to like think about her, and told her to give me signs and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
like, the funeral and wake, I can't even remember because it was such a blur. And I'm sure you guys probably feel the same way about that.
Yes.
But what I do remember is just getting back to school and going to the library that day because I had so much work to catch up on. And always, Kenesha is such a small school. Everybody knows everybody. It's only like 4,000 kids, so everybody knew my mom had passed. So everyone was like, "Whoa, like what are you doing back?" And everybody's giving me hugs, and people I don't know very well, people I do know, and it was weird, but I felt like so numb, to it at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I my professors were so great, and it was really difficult for me to know where to start because everybody's grieving right now in my family, right? Like my dad's grieving.
Yeah.
He lost the love of his life. My sisters just lost their mother and they're grieving really hard. And I'm grieving really hard. And like everybody handles it so differently, and we're all kind of like living a little bit of a separate life in terms of our own grief. Obviously we'd grieve together at, family parties and things like that first year. But when I was at college, I just felt very, I wouldn't say alone because I wasn't. I had so many great, great people in my life, and I hate saying that, but in that moment, I felt just so lost. I guess that's the way to say it.
Isolated?
Isolated, yeah. And I didn't really know how to handle it. I think what I really resorted to at first was going out and partying and doing that kind of stuff and going out with my friends and distracting myself. But I think like for me, life in those first couple years was kind of just getting through the day.
Yeah.
And then, it still has kind of been like that, but I actually have a professor and she was my academic advisor as well. And she kind of had a really good conversation with me quite recently. And, we talked and she's like, Steven, I didn't know your mom. And she actually lost her father at the same age as me to the same kind of cancer as
Holy shit.
me.
Oh, wow.
And she was my advisor. So I almost felt like God put us into each other's lives because she was also my academic advisor, and she was the head of the communications department at Canisius. And she kind of had a tough love conversation with me. It's just like, Stephen, like you need to start, living your life again. You can let go, but you need to live your life too. Like letting go doesn't mean that you're forgetting about your mom. And I think that was really hard for me. I didn't want to let go because I felt like it was me forgetting about my mom, right? It was me,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, yeah, forgetting her. And I never wanted to. Even the bad memories, I never wanted to. But, she kind of said, like, I don't want you to be that person who never is able to kind of move on with their life because your mom wouldn't want that. And you need to learn to, do that and find your own happiness and find your own outlets of like what your mom would be happy with.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really moving for me. And it was really hard for me to hear at first. And I couldn't even say to her like, oh, what do you know about it? Because she knows everything about it. She knows everything about it. And she's also a breast cancer survivor herself.
Damn.
So she's been through the ropes. And, we talked for like an hour and, she gave me a big hug and it really opened my mind to a lot of things of like, I can't carry this, with me for the rest of my life, this anger and sadness that I carry. Cause it's not going to be healthy and it's only going to hurt me in the long run,
Right. So how did you start to process that anger?
So like I said, like how did I process it? Like, what did I do to
accept it, resolve it, heal from it, transform it.
Yeah, like walking away from that conversation. Like what was...
Yeah, I think for me, I just had to take some time to think about it. And I remember, I think I went biking after that conversation and I just kind of thought about it. And I thought about what would my mom want, right? What would mom want? What did she always want from me? What did she want for any of us as kids? And for my dad and for any of us. And it was to be happy. I mean, my mom was, such a selfless person. I mean, she didn't have a bucket list. She didn't have, things she wanted to do. All she really wanted was to be with her family. And that was how she wanted to spend her last days, was surrounded by her family, doing basic things, drinking a cup of coffee, taking my dog for a walk at the time. And she was such a simple woman, and she loved us so deeply. She loved my dad so deeply. She loved, all of us. And I think what she would have wanted, and looking back, and just, I try to remind myself, is for us not to like lose our lives over it. You know what I mean? Like, not let us lose ourselves, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say is, let her death become something that motivates us to be better, and to be better for each other as a family, and be better for myself too. And I think that's something that your podcast has also helped me with too, is just like learning to understand my grief, and that it's not going to go away, but there's ways to deal with it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting. You mentioned the coffee. Mary also mentioned that your mom liked to drink coffee.
Oh yeah.
I find myself listening to you and reflecting on Mary's episode, and I just feel, and I want to acknowledge right now, I feel like there's just so much warmth that you guys have towards your mom and towards your family, and to the people who've loved and supported you guys through this. And I think that's really beautiful. And I kind of almost get this sense of like who your mom was, and the warmth that she was and that she brought to everybody, because I really see that reflected in you and in Mary when you guys share. I think it's really beautiful.
I really appreciate that a lot. Thank you. And I think it's so hard for me, because I'm sure you feel the same way. And in certain ways, I know sometimes you said that, you kind of said earlier in the episode that you sometimes don't want to meet people from, who knew your past life. But for me, it's a little bit of the opposite, where it's like, I wish you had known my mom, like I wish, because every person, as I'm sure your wife did, and I'm sure your mother did, like every person that she met in her life, I felt like she made better somehow, in some way. Right.
Yes.
And she was just such a caring soul. And I think sometimes for me, I just try to remind myself that, like, I think what she did on this earth in 51 years is something that some people don't do in 95. I really do believe that. She touched me in my life, and emotionally in so many ways, and just taught me how to be a good person, a good partner, a good friend. And when I talk about her, I feel good. I do. I think it's hard to talk to people about it, because there's a sense of like, oh, and I think Ashley, you touched on it at one point, like, oh, you're like, you never talk about your mom, or something like that, or like it, like, but for me, it's like, if it's with the right person, it's like something so healing for me. It's so like therapeutic, and I feel like it brings her back. Like all the memories that I couldn't think of, when I start talking about her, I think of now.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Do you have any? I call them rituals, but any, like, I know you mentioned looking back at the photo, but are there things that when you're like, okay, I want to connect with my mom again, connect to that memory, connect to that love? Do you have any rituals or things that you do that allow you to tap into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and my biggest thing is I love to take walks, and I love to hike, and those are things my mom loves. I mean, she wasn't like a crazy hiker by any means, but like men in ponds and stuff like that. And
so funny. Literally, Mary said the
I
same
was just thinking that. I'm like, that is like verbatim what Mary said too.
Literally, like word for word.
But
I love it.
And me and Mary Grace are very, very similar.
Okay, makes sense.
We're kind of very similar personalities. But I really like to hike, or just like enjoy a sunset. Something where like I just feel like my mom's there. And like, for me, sometimes I'll read like, or go through like old text messages between us. And I wish I had saved more. My phone during that time like broke, I remember, and I was so sad because I lost all my messages. But luckily I had some screenshotted that I was able to find. And it was just messages between us just saying like, I love you, or, what's for dinner? And her telling me what was for dinner, but just something as simple as that. But like one thing that really I do, and I'd say this is more than even hiking, I don't know why I didn't mention this, but I love to cook sauce. And my mom made sauce every Sunday. And up until she was really sick, she was still doing it for me. She knew how much I loved her sauce. And I cook sauce all the time when I really miss her, especially in the fall and winter. And I love to like have people over too, because like that's what my mom would do. She loved to feed people. I feel really connected when I do that. when I cook, just because my mom was such a phenomenal cook.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'm the same. I cook to connect to my dad, and I bake to connect to my wife.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Was there anything specific your wife would bake that, you know?
Man, she was
Oh my God,
amazing.
she was a baker.
Like we were actually going to open a bakery at one point in our lives because people were paying her for it. Like she was phenomenal, and she was a great cook too. But my dad was, and that's a very long story, but basically he ended up dying almost exactly a year before my wife. And he was my biological father. We kind of came back together after really like being distant. And he was an amazing cook, and it's what he did like his whole life. And he left me his knives.
Wow.
So he bought knives, which I found out, at the end of his life, that he bought this special set of knives specifically to use and to pass down to me. So I use them when I want to reconnect to him, and I just kind of, use that as a way to also express like, here's my love and my gratitude that maybe I can't quite say to people, and have them over and watch them just kind of be in that moment of joy with good food.
That's awesome. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, I love that. I love that you do that. I could relate to the sauce. Yeah. As an Italian man myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely talking to the right people right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally. It's like, make that three of us.
Yeah, exactly. But I appreciate so much of what you've shared, what you've told us. I just wanted to open up an opportunity if there's any last memory maybe that you had of your mom, or any last thing that you would want to say to anybody who is going through this or caring for somebody who has maybe been in your position.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think for me, I would say, take it a day by time if you're going through something like this. If you're struggling one day and you feel good the next day, that's totally normal.
Yes.
Doesn't make you crazy.
Uh-huh.
Just makes you human. So I think I would say that. And also just one thing I just want to say is I just want to thank, you guys for having me on the show, but I also want to thank all the people, and they know who they are if they listen to this, who were there for me and there for my family during probably I hope the worst time of my life, and who was there on my good days and my bad days and have been there for me through it all. And especially my family, my sisters and my dad. And, I feel like for a while we grieved so separate, and we're kind of like coming together again, and it feels really good. And, I think I'll leave it with this. And I love Jimmy Valvano. He always said, you should laugh. You should laugh every day. You should cry every day, and you should think every day. And I think that's a quote that I live with, and I think I will continue to. And he's somebody who battled with cancer, who I always have looked up to as well. So those are kind of my last thoughts.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, me too. I think it's so great how much of a support system you had with your friends as well.
Oh yeah.
And of course your family, but I think sometimes, well, I don't know. I mean, even sometimes just I'm very closed off and like don't necessarily, talk about or open up. It takes me a little bit of
We're
time.
quite the opposite.
But for you to be able to, lean on your friends and feel comfortable to do that, I think is amazing, and is probably something that, really, from the sounds of it, really helped you get through that time, especially when, it was just you at home, or even, just you here in Buffalo and your family was an hour away. Like I went to UB, so I remember the hour away, and left my siblings and family, left them behind, if you will. But I think that's just really something that stood out from tonight's conversation.
Yeah, I've got some really amazing friends, and one person too is I forgot to mention was one of my best friends, probably one of my best friends, Joe. He was always there. The day after the funeral, I actually went over to his apartment and just kind of hung out with him and his college friends. He went to RIT, and I mean, I could go on and on about all the friends that helped me, but he's one person that through it all really, really found a way where we never talked about it ever really.
Yeah.
He was one of those guys that just was there. He just was always like there to take me out of my hump. He knew it. And he said, okay, let's go grab some drinks. Let's go play basketball. Let's go do whatever. but we never talked about it. But he didn't have to say anything because he just knew he was there, so, and there were so many people like that as well, but that's one person I want to definitely shout out.
Basketball must have been a thing because my friends that I went to their house after, they had a basketball court in their backyard.
Oh, that's the best.
So yeah, we literally was like, I would just go there all the time to play with them. And, we were like young at that time, but I still think they knew like Ashley's mom is sick. Like I'm sure that their parents told them because they would have seen her, and, so like that was a huge, I wouldn't have labeled it a stress reliever back then when I was 7, 8, and 9, but, being able to go over to their house and, where it was normal, if you will, I think definitely helped me through those years for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you guys.
And, we appreciate you sharing. We appreciate hearing another side to the story about your mom and your family. And like I said, you guys just emanate warmth and love and gratitude towards each other. That's what really sticks out to me. And it allows me to tap into kind of the gratitude that I've had over the years that maybe I've forgotten or didn't hold on to. So I appreciate that. And I think that's beautiful. And I hope our audience is able to capture that as well.
Of course. And I appreciate, you guys as well. And especially just all the questions that you ask, you can tell are very, thought out, but also the fact that you guys can connect with whoever's on this podcast, whether it be me, my sister, or, the other viewers that you've had on here, not viewers, audience members you've had on here. It's just, I feel like even if I didn't do this, I'm really happy I did. But even if I didn't do this, I think just listening to your podcast helps me a lot in my own journey of acceptance, right? Accepting that this is a kind of a new reality and that you're not alone in it. Grief is not, because when you're grieving, you feel so alone, right? You feel like nobody else gets it. Nobody else understands. But
that's right.
When you hear stories like yours and Ashley's and, other people who've been on, it's just, it really makes you realize, okay, like I'm not alone in this. Other people have been through this. I appreciate what you guys do, and I keep doing it because you're only going to help more and more people as time goes on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast.